Kat Lanteigne never got tainted blood. No one in her immediate family did either. But when she learned of this healthcare crisis 20 years ago, something infuriated her about the injustice of it all. Eventually, she wrote a play about the blood scandal called Tainted, which debuted a year and a half ago in Toronto, and Kat Lanteigne joins us now here in the studio. Great to meet you.
Hi.
Take us back to that moment when you're watching TV in British Columbia, where you were living at the time, with your mom, and the story about the blood scandal comes on, and what?
Well, it was my mom and my godmother, and the person on the television was my godmother's sister. And when I asked them what was wrong, because it was clearly an upsetting interview, they didn't, the first thing that they said to me was, she's been betrayed, and they were both crying. And I was in my young teens, and I didn't really grasp what they were talking about, but they were clearly very upset. And then after that, they told me the story about the tainted blood crisis and what it was.
You think a seed was planted that moment?
I know a seed was planted at that moment because my uncle, who I became very close to later in life, who was gay, had AIDS, and he subsequently passed away in 2001. So I knew what it was like to be in a family with somebody who had that illness during a time where there was a lot of stigma attached to it. And so I witnessed the kind of injustice he had experienced living with HIV and AIDS as a gay man. And then I was witnessing from afar this other person in my life who, wasn't in my immediate family, and seeing how difficult it was for her and the people around her to try to get people to acknowledge the truth of what had happened to her.
But I guess the idea of doing a play, sort of percolated around in your head for a while?
Well, it started as a film/television project, and I couldn't get anybody to do it, to get behind it.
Doesn't that say volumes?
Yes,
I mean, the worst healthcare crisis in Canadian history, and no one was interested in making a movie about it.
No. And so I just couldn't let the story not have some kind of fictionalized version of itself so it could reach a wider audience and also be able to be performed for generations to come. And I realized after I went to theater school in Bristol at the Old Vic that maybe it was meant to be a play first, because there's a certain power that theater has that's quite incredible, because it's, you have that living history right in front of you, and an audience can connect in a certain way.
So how did you choose to tell the story?
Well, I chose to tell the story in a family model. So when I went on and launched my research efforts, I did across Canada reach out to people, family members who'd been impacted. I talked to Justice Horace Creever, lawyers who'd been involved, a lot of surviving hemophiliacs, including Mike. That's how I met Smudge as well. And what I did was create a fictional family, but they were all based on true stories, to create a proper image of the story that I felt an audience could really relate to.
How eager were the people that you talked to for your research to talk to you?
They were magical. They were so open and so generous with their time with me, and let me in on incredibly painful stories, and let me in on very intimate details to what their personal struggles were. And all the families had some commonalities, and all of them had very distinctive things happen to them as well that were unique to them. And they were very supportive of the piece being done as a play, and I could not have made the play that we ended up making without their kind of support.
When you are trying to mount a play that is based on truth, where you have talked to real people who have experienced death and bad health and so on, how different is that from just doing a play about anything at all?
Well, you sweat a lot on opening night because there's a real feeling of letting people down, of making sure that you've captured the story in a very authentic way.
So they had not seen it before opening night?
No. No, only a few people had read the script. And I knew on opening night, when the people sort of poured into the lobby and there were a lot of tears, but there was also a lot of hugging and a lot of sharing, that we as a company, it wasn't just me, but as a company of artists, had really been able to tell that story in a way that captured it and also did justice to the people who were directly impacted, which was the most important thing for me.
So tell me about those moments from end of play to first reaction from the people that the play is actually about. How nervous are you at that point?
I'm beyond nervous. I saw the play at the preview night. I actually couldn't sit in the audience on opening night.
How come?
Because I was I had noticed in the previews there was so much crying in the audience. That was one thing that was very difficult. I couldn't cope with the crying. And I was just so terrified of letting people down, and I shouldn't have been, because the company did a great job. But it proved to be very, it was like a watershed moment, I think, for them to be able to have some kind of acknowledgement, that they hadn't had before.
That has been part of the problem of their story, right?
Yes.
It's just getting people to pay attention to their trauma.
A huge part of the problem. And so that was a fantastic, it was just so great as an artist to be able to provide that space for the few weeks that we ran the first run of the show in Toronto, to give them that place. We also did talkback sessions where Tainted Blood survivors could talk with the audience as well. And that was really special. It was special, and there was a whole new generation of people who didn't know anything about the Tainted Blood crisis who got to see the play.
When people started to come up to you after the play was over,
Yeah.
and give you their opinions of what they had just seen, what did you hear?
I heard, oh, Steve, you're Barbara Walters. I'm gonna cry now. No, I think people were very kind. I'm not trying to toot my own horn. They were very kind. They were very complimentary. But the most common thing was, I saw my dad or I saw my brother in your play.
Because the characters were composites of real people.
Yeah, and that to me was just so spectacular, because that's what you dream of happening when you do a piece of art, is that people are going to be able to relate to it on a universal level. When we did the reading tour last fall, we were in Kingston, and I met this incredible woman who'd lost all 4 of her brothers. She was from a New Brunswick family, and she came to the play, and after we had just stood up, she walked right out in the middle of the stage in front of everybody, and she just threw her arms around me. And that's the kind of connection that as an artist that you're always dreaming of and hope for, but it rarely comes, because usually something is based on success of a performance, right? Or something like that. And it wasn't about that. It was about the story that we were telling. And the audience was more important than me or any of the other artists that were participating in making the show.
Given the need to constantly learn and relearn the lessons of history, does this play have legs?
I think it has legs, because it certainly has. Looks like it's going to go to London. The people who are dealing with the contaminated blood crisis there are still fighting, if you can imagine. Their inquiry just finished last month. David Cameron just apologized after all of these years, the first prime minister to do so. And so it has a universal appeal. And I think it's a timeless story. I think the way that I wrote Tainted, it's intentionally become a timeless story. Yeah.
Is it ever going to get made into that movie you wanted to make originally?
I hope so. Well, I think it would be a beautiful film or a really great limited television series. And it will reach a much wider audience than we certainly could ever do in the world of theater. And I think it would be equally as compelling and painful and spectacular and moving.
Do you think you've ever written anything before this or since this debuted that was as impactful on as many people as this was?
No, and I don't know if I ever could. Certainly not from my personal connection with the story. And doing this play has absolutely changed my life as a person and as an artist.
How so?
Well, I became an advocate that I never thought that I was going to be part of my journey, and lobbying Queen's Park to make sure that the blood legislation went through, and learning how important it is to give people a voice who might not have one. That definitely opened my eyes. And seeing that people will do the right thing, but sometimes you have to make them see that they need to do it. And that how spectacular Canadians are and how forgiving Canadians are. That piece just really blew me away from across the country. Really gentle-hearted, genuine people who don't want just a good life for themselves, but for others.
Great. Kat, awfully good of you to come into TVO tonight and tell us all
Thank you.
about it. That's Kat Lanteigne, who wrote Tainted, which we hope to see at future stages and movie theaters everywhere. Thanks, Kat.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.